Have you ever wondered why some people are able to absorb information really quickly while on the other hand, you seemingly can't, no matter how much work you put into it? Well, I've been there, I've been in your shoes, I know what that feels like, but I'm here to tell you it's not your fault. You just were never taught the right way, but that all changes today because I'm going to accelerate your pace of learning. So by the time that this 10 to 15 minute video is done, you're going to think it was well worth your time. My name is Jun Yu. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. I am calling these secrets purposefully because sometimes it does feel like the school system is hiding some of these techniques because they're so well supported and they would literally completely transform your experiences in education if you could learn how to apply them so that you can reap the benefits of them. So I have this great desire in me to teach you them because I wish that I was exposed to them earlier too. If you have any questions throughout this video, please leave them in the comments below. I'm more than happy to answer them. Give this video a thumbs up and of course subscribe. It's really important that we start with what is learning, and to do that we have to understand neuroplasticity. You see, in our brains we have billions of neurons that have the potential to make trillions of connections, and neuroplasticity is our brain's ability to physically change in response to an experience. And what is actually changing? Well, it's the connections between two neurons, and the more repetitions there are, the more durable that connection becomes, and this ultimately plays a vital role in our ability to encode information from our short-term memory to our long-term memory. But there are ways to optimize this. There are ways to look at evidence-based techniques and apply them across our stages of learning to really be able to reap the benefits of them. And we're going to break this down as simply as possible in this practical video for you so that after it's over, you can immediately apply them. Now, before we get into the very first secret, I do want to take a little bit of time here to share with you guys some really exciting and exclusive news. You see, 5 years ago, I could have never imagined myself to be in the shoes that I am in today. And it's always a little bit awkward to think about or even say aloud that I will be graduating with 2 degrees, having done 6-month-long internships in pharma, already been offered multiple positions in biomedical engineering even before I graduate, have been able to build a super successful business that's helped me pay off my student loans by myself, been able to help my parents be able to pay off their debts, and that's been a really surreal experience, all while being the healthiest mentally, physically, and spiritually that I've ever been. And this becomes so much more important knowing where it started from. I come from an immigrant family that, first of all, none of my parents really speak the language at all. We always struggled financially, and my parents went through a really nasty divorce that completely broke me, and it made our family deal with a lot of mental health issues. And to know that I came from that background to where I am today is truly the greatest blessing. And I wish that I had somebody throughout that process, almost as a mentor of mine, to tell me when I'm on the right track, when I'm not. And I really think that would have accelerated my pace of learning. But the greatest joy of all of this, and I truly believe what my calling is now to be able to help all of you reach that type of success and be able to do it in the right way. And with this project, I now have the ability to do that at a depth that was never done before, whether it be relationships, and it can be both platonic or romantic. It could be about money, it could be about productivity, it can be about prospective careers, it can be about being an exceptional student, all while developing yourself with your mental and your physical and spiritual pillars, all wrapped up in a self-growth formula dedicated for all of you guys with months and months of preparation just right before launch. And in just a few days, it will be coming live. And so I'm super excited to announce that. If you think that's something that you're interested in, sign up to the waitlist below and you will be getting those exclusive announcements and also exclusive offers when the launch comes about. So with that being said, let's get into the rest of the video. The first secret is active recall, and this is a principle that has an ample number of supporting literature. In its simplest explanation, it is pulling information out of our brains without our source material to help us. And that's why it's synonymous with free recall. We are freely remembering a piece of information without a cue to help us. And it's a great way to self-assess. And actually, many of you are probably really familiar in the context of revision for active recall, right? Because I've talked about it so much, and the specific applications that I always recommend are the learning method, the 5-minute technique, along with your practice test. And so I actually want to spend this time approaching it a little bit differently. I want to talk about it in the context of what you can do before class, during class, immediately after class. And it's because if you can leverage the benefits of active recall in your earlier stages, by the time you get into your revision, you will have such a strong foundation of knowledge that you're absolutely going to smash your revision. So I think it's important that we talk about it in this light too. So before your classes, what I want you to do are 5 to 10 question pre-tests, okay? And what do we know about knowledge? It builds upon itself. We sometimes fall into this false narrative that the new topic we're going to learn in class is completely irrelevant. It's completely new, when in reality, no, it's probably connected to information that we've learned already in some capacity. And if you had used the proper techniques before and had such a deep understanding of that topic before, you can actually surprise yourself with how well you can answer questions, even without getting that full exposure in class. But when you practice the active recall here, you are trying to freely recall the information that you've learned in the past. And in doing so, you're trying to understand how this information is relevant to the material that you've learned. And also, you're actually going to be leveraging the hypercorrection effect, which states that we have the tendency to learn better when we're corrected on an answer than if we had gotten it right the first time around. And so that's how you're going to be doing it before class. But active recall can also be applied within your classes by creating active recall questions. So instead of passively rewriting everything that the teacher is saying aloud, which is very low utility, we're going to perform something that's very high utility. It's going to require you to take an additional step into the teacher's mind and ask yourself, how can this information be tested? How is this information relevant? Why is this information important? In which context could this be applied? And what are some examples that this information could be tested with? And in doing that, what you are doing is creating such quality questions for yourself so that after class is over, you have created yourself the perfect review sheet. As you look at the questions that you've created, you have the opportunity to answer them thoroughly while freely recalling the information. So no presentation in front of you. I don't want you to get your textbooks out here. I want you to literally try and regurgitate the things that you could have remembered, and also add in any information that you can recall from previous topics before that are relevant. And in doing that, yes, you're going to get a lot of these right, but also you're going to get some wrong. But this is going to scope your strengths and your weaknesses early on, so you can consolidate the information that you can remember and then be able to target your weaknesses for your revisions. And that's just a great way to be extremely efficient when you get into your revision, instead of just studying all the material from scratch. So active recall is extremely beneficial. Stop with the low utility highlighting, rereading, or rewriting. This is your opportunity to really make use of one of the most well-supported techniques out there, active recall. Secret number 2, spaced repetition. Irving Ebbinghaus had discovered the forgetting curve. And if you haven't been exposed to that before, let's break it down right now. So on screen, we're gonna have the y-axis represent retention, and the x-axis is going to represent the number of days. So this graph is going to show us how quickly we lose information as human beings, okay? So on day 0, what we'll have is a retention of 100%. Now, day 1, which is 1 day after you had been exposed to that information, that knowledge in terms of how much you were able to retain is going to drop all the way down to 35%. Then on day 2, it's going to drop even further to 17%. Then day 4, it'll drop down to 8%, and then it will start to bottom out with this exponential decay function. Those percentages are all going to be dependent on the type of material that you're learning, how much information background you had on it, how relevant it is to you. A ton of different things, but in general, this curve points out to us as human beings how quickly and how rapidly we lose information. And this actually makes sense, right? Because think about how much auditory and visual stimuli we see on every second basis, especially with our phones nowadays. If our brain tried to pay attention to every single one of those pieces of information and then store it, our brains would literally explode. And so it needs to get good at forgetting information. And so how can we make that information stick better? Well, there are ways to make the information relevant, and there's also tactics like spaced repetition, which have been so well supported in literature to have a ginormous benefit. And so what would this look like practically? Well, the interval between your study sessions when the material is still new or unfamiliar to you will be shorter. And then when the information becomes more relevant, the intervals between your study sessions become longer. And so you might study on the first day, and then you might study that same topic on the second day, and then the fourth day, and then in a week, and then 2 weeks, and then in a month, and then 2 months. And I know the first thought in your mind is, June, there's no way I can repeatedly study this topic. You think I have time for that? And I would tell you, hold on, give me a second. Hear me out, right? And so what happens in each of those study sessions? Well, because the foundation of your knowledge grows each time, you're not studying for as long in each subsequent session. And more importantly, in the context of when it comes down to your revision for your exams, no longer are you needing to cram and learning material from scratch and spending another 3-4 days reading your textbook or looking through your lectures anymore. No, because you would have organized your revision timetables in a manner in which spaced repetitions were integrated in it, which is super easy to do if you do this prospectively, right? So before your term starts, when you have an understanding of your syllabi and the topics that are going to be covered, and you can space them out this way, you have such a great opportunity to save yourself a tremendous amount of time right before your exams to reduce that anxiety that comes with feeling unprepared. And I promise you it would make a world's difference. So actually make use of spaced practice. Secret number 3, and we can say that this one is the better kept secret in comparison to the first two, because I rarely see students adopt it, but it can be just as beneficial, right? And especially in the context of math classes. So let's look at a particular example, and I really do believe it would highlight the benefit of it for all of you to understand. And so let's say you're a math student learning derivatives, right? We all love derivatives. In that case, we would be exposed to all the relevant rules. So you have your constant rule, you have your power rule, your sum and your difference rule, your product and your quotient rule, and your chain rule, right? And so each of your subsequent classes may be dedicated to a specific rule, and then your homework would reflect that. Now, there is evidence that shows it is beneficial for us to be initially exposed to information in that way, in that format, in a blocked format or a blocked approach. But when it comes to us practicing that material, when it comes to us revising that material for our exams, we should be immediately adopting interleaved practice. And what would that look like? That's you simply taking the questions from all those individual homework assignments and reorganizing them and creating a completely different order. Why? Because it forces you to step away from any passive process that you might be engaged in. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's say that questions 1 through 5, you know they're in close proximity together. You know that you learned the product rule first. And so you know for a fact that all those questions are going to be in relation to that product rule. So you just have to think about the steps, and then you complete those first 5 questions. Then you look at questions 5 to 10 and you think, yeah, those are all going to be based on the quotient rule. So you immediately know that that's the application. So you look at the rules for that and you immediately apply and you do the practice that way. That is not going to be helpful because, first of all, you're not going to be tested that way, right? You would never be tested with a professor prompting you on which technique to use, especially when you get into higher education. In engineering, that's never the case. We're completely given a different application or different context, and we have to synthesize new knowledge by being able to distinguish characteristics of those problems and know which tool to utilize from what we've learned, right? And so we want to ensure that our practice simulates that type of experience. And so when you completely reorganize randomly these questions, what happens is you have to actually actively engage with the material and ask yourself that. So you look at a question and think to yourself, what is the characteristic of this question that prompts me to use a specific rule that I've learned? And you start to recognize the differences amongst the types of questions, but you can also start to form linkages across the similarities too. And that's when you get the really deep comprehension that you're looking for. And of course, this is significantly significantly harder than doing the blocked practice. But there's also a phenomenon called desirable difficulty, and it states that the harder it is for us to learn something, the better it will stick. The more we challenge ourselves, the better. And so this is our opportunity to simulate an experience that will actually emulate what is going to be on our exams, but also what's going to be in our real world scenarios in our professional careers. And it allows us to leverage that desirable difficulty. And also, interleaving doesn't solely apply to the topics, but also the modes of learning too. And so perhaps one day you are utilizing the blurting method or the Feynman technique, and then you want to complement that with drawing a diagram to understand the linkages, or perhaps you watch a YouTube video, or perhaps you watch an online module that's from an external source. And all of this is going to provide you different perspectives of that topic at hand or of that material. So it can be extremely beneficial. So interleaving is really powerful, and I hope that you take advantage of it. And secret number 4, the most important one of them all, the one that if you neglect, nothing I ever tell you will ever matter. It is sleep. It is deep rest. And before you tune me out and think that this is trivial, I promise you it's not. And I know this because I see a lot of students cram and pull all-nighters, and that is literally the opposite to what I'm about to say here. If you understood the importance of deep rest, and you will now, you would never do that ever again, because it's probably the worst thing you could ever do. So let's look at what I'm talking about. So neuroplasticity, everything that we talked about in that introduction, can be initiated, yes, absolutely, by deep focus. And so I love that you're prioritizing your study sessions. I love that you want to optimize your study sessions. But guess what? The actual rewiring of those neurons, those connections, as they become repeated and strengthened, all of that memory consolidation that happens, it occurs in your sleep. It occurs in your deep rest. And so neuroplasticity, how you learn, is a 2-step process. It's not just the deep focus, but it's also deep rest. And so when you are pulling all-nighters and you're cramming, the reason why it's so inefficient and ineffective is you will learn the material, or you will think that you learn the material because you've put active focus towards it, and then you will pull the all-nighter. You might even have done well on the exam the next day. If you are in maybe perhaps a lower class in high school, yes, the exam might have been so easy enough that it was regurgitation questions where you could go ahead and just literally remember what you had just looked at an hour or 2 hours before. But when you get into higher education, this will definitely not fly, right? And moreover, ask yourself, how many times when you cram or pulled an all-nighter do you remember the information the next day after you eventually go to bed? Probably rarely, probably 0 times do you ever do that, right? Unless you went ahead and then you repeated the material, you slept, and then you had gone over the material again. But what happens so much is that we don't prioritize the knowledge that we have after the exam is over. We think that the grade is so important. And again, to excel in that exam in the first place, you should have slept to consolidate the information. And hopefully if you had used all the other techniques up to this point, you're not necessarily feeling like there's this requirement of you to pull an all-nighter, right? You don't need that additional 6-7 hours. As you sleep, it's a better usage of that, but also think about the knowledge that you'll have after the exam's over. You're doing the right thing about consolidating this information. And so with that, as we know that information builds upon itself, you're going to be able to recall that information again. And we know that this is so important, not just in our academics, but also in our professional careers. So don't get in the bad habit of cramming, and actually prioritize your sleep. Even I tell everyone that I work with this, I would personally prefer to get an additional 1 or 2 hours of sleep than get an additional 1 or 2 hours of studying or last minute studying, because usually that last minute studying isn't high quality studying. And moreover, if you have a high performing brain that day, you have a better ability to recall past information and to be able to create these linkages in information where, you know, if you've created this web of knowledge that is so well developed with the linkages across, even if there's gaps in information across those linkages, you can fill those gaps in. You can almost be able to guess really well, if you will, because you have all this context of information, right? So you want your brain to be in its best performance state, so get your sleep. And there are so many ways to optimize your sleep, and I'm really considering just doing a whole video about how to optimize your sleep. There are ways in terms of course, caffeine cutoff time, having a regular sleep schedule, whether it be in your weekday or at your weekends, whether it be about lowering the temperature in your room. There are so many ways that you can optimize your sleep. If that's of interest to you, I'll be more than happy to do that. So with that being said, those were the 4 secrets that I will transform the pace of your learning. And hopefully now you have the context of how, and it's up to you to go ahead and apply them. And if you have any questions as you apply them, again, leave them in the comments below. I'm more than happy to help you. I know that you have great potential in you, and if I can guide you or help you in any capacity, I'm more than happy to do that. Give this video a thumbs up, and of course, subscribe. So until next time, take care of yourselves. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you at the top.